Hello, folks, and welcome to the Entertainment Log. Today we highlight the 1989 horror film Pet Sematary. Pet Sematary is a 1989 American supernatural horror film and the first adaptation of Stephen King's 1983 novel of the same name. Directed by Mary Lambert and written by King, it stars Dale Midkiff, Denise Crosby, Blaze Birdall, Fred Gwynne, and Miko Hughes as Gage Creed. The title is a sensational spelling of Pet Sematary. The film was released on April 21st, 1989, and grossed $89.5 million at the box office on a budget of $11.5 million. A sequel, Pet Sematary 2, was released in 1992, and a second film adaptation was released in 2019. The Creed family, Louis, Rachel, their children, Ellie and Gage, and their pet cat Church, moved from Chicago to rural Ludlow, Maine, after Louis accepts a job as a physician with the University of Maine. They befriend their neighbor, Judd Crandall, who takes them to an isolated pet cemetery, misspelled Sematary, in the forest behind the Creed's new home. Louis encounters Victor Pascal, a jogger who is mortally injured after being hit by a truck. He warns Louis about the pet cemetery before dying, calling Louis by name though they have never met. That night, Pascal appears to Louis as a ghost and leads him to the cemetery, warning him not to cross the barrier because the ground beyond is sour. Louis awakens, assuming it was a dream, but notices his feet are covered in dirt. During Thanksgiving, while the family is gone, Church is run down on the highway. Realizing Ellie will be devastated, Judd takes Louis beyond the pet cemetery and deep into the woods, where they reach an ancient burial ground. Judd instructs Louis to bury the cat and warns him not to tell anyone about what they have done. The next day, a reanimated Church returns to the house. He now stinks, moves sluggishly, his eyes glow, and he is vicious toward Louis. Judd explains that as a boy, he revived his pet dog and that although the cat might be different, it will save Ellie the grief of losing her pet. Sometime later, Gage is killed by a truck along the same highway. Judd anticipates that Louis is considering burying his son in the sour ground, although Louis denies it. Judd believes that introducing Louis to the ritual ground aroused the malevolent forces present there, which caused Gage's death. He tells him the story of a local named Bill Baderman who buried his young son Timmy in the ground after he was killed near the end of World War II. Timmy returned as a malevolent zombie, terrifying the townsfolk. A group of men, including Judd, tried destroying Timmy by lighting the Baderman house on fire, only for Bill to perish with his son. Judd insists that the burial ground is evil and Louis must not bury his son there, adding that sometimes dead is better. After the funeral, Rachel and Ellie leave for Chicago while Louis remains home to take care of loose ends. Despite Pascal and Judd's warnings, Louis exhumes his son's body and buries him at the ritual site. In Chicago, Pascal appears to Ellie in a dream and warns her that Louis is about to do something terrible. Rachel is unnerved by her daughter's dream, but can only reach Judd when she calls, who tells her Louis is not home. She decides to return to Maine, much to Judd's alarm. That night, a reanimated Gage returns home and steals a scalpel from his father's bag. He taunts Judd before slashing his Achilles tendon and his mouth before biting his throat off, killing him. Rachel returns home and is lured into Judd's house by the voice and specter of her dead sister Zelda, only to discover that she is actually seeing Gage holding a scalpel. In shock and disbelief, Rachel reaches down to hug her son and he kills her. Waking up from his sleep, Louis notices Gage's muddy footprints in the house and discovers his scalpel missing. Receiving a phone call from Gage that he has played with Judd and Mommy, he fills 3 syringes with morphine and heads to Judd's house. Encountering Church, he kills the cat with an injection before entering the house. Finding Judd's body under his bed, Gage taunts him further and Louis is startled by Rachel's body hanging from the attic before Gage attacks him. After a brief battle, Lewis overpowers Gage and injects him with the morphine syringe. He then lights Judd's house on fire, leaving it to burn as he carries Rachel's body to the burial ground. Pascal appears and warns Lewis not to make it worse, but Lewis, grief-stricken to the point of insanity, believes that he waited too long when he buried Gage, but burying Rachel will work this time, because she had died just hours ago. That night, Rachel returns to Lewis and the couple embrace. Rachel takes a large knife from the counter before Lewis screams. The film rights were sold to George A. Romero in 1984 for $10,000. King had previously declined several other offers for a film adaptation. Romero eventually had to pull out of the production as he was busy with Monkey Shines. Development executive Lindsay Doran loved the finished script and advocated for it to be made at Embassy Pictures and then at Paramount Pictures after she became vice president of production there in 1985. She was told each time that there was no more demand for Stephen King films after the slew of adaptations from his novels released in the early 80s. It was only during the 1988 Writers Guild of America strike that Paramount reconsidered because the studio was facing a possible shortage of new productions for 1989 release. Stephen King's script for Pet Sematary was finished and ready to go, so Doran was given the green light to obtain the rights for Paramount and start production. King, who had final say on the choice of a director, met with the studio's first choice of Mary Lambert. She impressed him with her enthusiasm for his novels and her commitment to stay faithful to his source material, which secured her the job. The original cut of the film delivered to Paramount's executives was judged to be too long, so excess footage had to be removed. The original ending scene was more ambiguous. It showed only the undead Rachel entering the kitchen where Lewis is playing solitaire, leaving his fate uncertain. Although Lambert called this the more spooky, sad, tragic ending because the audience knows it's not going to be what he wants. She's not coming back as his wife. The studio decided it was too tame, and at their request, it was reshot to be more graphic. Rachel's appearance was made far more gruesome with special prosthetic effects, and she kills Lewis at the end as suggested by his screams when the film cuts to black. Initially, Paramount executives wanted a pair of twins to play the role of Gage, like those chosen to play Ellie, which was the more cost-effective option. However, Lambert was very impressed with 2-year-old Miko Hughes, who she felt was a natural talent despite his young age, so she lobbied the studio to accept her choice. She also faced resistance from executives over her choice to cast Fred Gwynne, whom the studio had believed audiences would not take seriously because of his fame as Herman Munster. After first auditioning girls for the role of Zelda, Lambert changed course and ended up casting Andrew Hubitsek in the role because she felt having a grown man playing the role of a teenage girl deformed by spinal meningitis made the character more frightening. As stipulated by King when selling the rights, Pet Sematary was shot in Maine, where the story was set and King himself wrote the screenplay. Production was based in Ellsworth, and auditions held at the Grand Theater, where several hundred locals auditioned to be extras for small spoken roles. King himself was very involved in the filming process, consulting with Lambert frequently on her ideas for the story and any deviations from the script she wished to make. The house used for the Creed's home is a private residence near Hancock, while Judd's house across the street was actually a facade constructed around an existing house that was insulated with fireproof material so that the mock-up could be burned around it. The interiors of the Creed house were recreated on a soundstage in Ellsworth, while the interiors of Judd's house were built inside the Bangor Arsenal. The approach to the burial ground was filmed at an abandoned granite quarry on Mount Desert Island in Acadia National Park, while a hilltop near Sedgwick was the site of the ground itself. Other locations included a forest near Ellsworth for the Pet Sematary, Mount Hope Cemetery in Bangor for the graveyard scenes, and Ellsworth Town Hall, which stood in for the hospital of the University of Maine Orono. The Los Angeles Times wrote that the film defied the critics and opened at blockbuster levels. The film grossed $57 million in the United States. Rotten Tomatoes, a review aggregator, reports that 53% of 36 surveyed critics gave the film a positive review. The average rating is 5.6 out of 10. The website's critical consensus reads, Pet Sematary is a bruising horror flick that wears its quirks on its sleeves, to the detriment of its scare factor. On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 38 out of 100, based on 12 critics indicating generally unfavorable reviews. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film a grade B. Variety called it undead schlock dulled by a slasher film mentality. Vincent Canby of the New York Times wrote that the film has some effective ghoulish moments, but fails mostly because it doesn't trust the audience to do any of the work. Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune gave the film 0 stars out of 4 and called it sickening. Kevin Thomas of the Los Angeles Times wrote, Lambert goes for strong, succinct images and never stops to worry whether there's a lack of credibility or motivation. Richard Harrington of the Washington Post called it bland, cliched, and cheap. Harrington criticized Gage's actions as disturbing and the climax as an ugly payoff to an inept setup. Philip Strick of the Monthly Film Bulletin wrote, the family feuds and loyalties, which lend some coherence to the novel and justify its punchline, are simply plundered for their shock effect en route to the final bloodletting. Emaciated, then, rather than enhanced by its adaptation, Pet Sematary as a movie is nevertheless strikingly well told. Bloody Disgusting rated it 4.5 out of 5 stars and wrote, the plot alone would make for a scary movie, but by injecting excellent atmosphere, capable acting, and generally nightmarish scenes, Pet Sematary is a truly effective horror flick and well worth the price of admission. At Dread Central, Steve Barton rated it 4 out of 5 stars and called it one of the best King adaptations. Jason Jenkins rated it 3.5 out of 5 stars and called it one of the better King adaptations of the period. The film grossed $57.5 million in the United States and $32 million internationally for a worldwide total of $89.5 million. Pet Sematary was a top-renting VHS upon release. Paramount released it on DVD in 2006 and on Blu-ray in 2012. Pet Sematary was released on 4K UHD Blu-ray on March 26, 2019. A sequel, Pet Sematary 2, was released in 1992 to poor reviews and a disappointing box office. Although it references the events of the first film, the sequel focused on all new characters. A documentary, Unearthed and Untold, The Path to Pet Sematary, premiered in September 2014 and was released in January 2017. Pet Sematary was ranked number 16 on IFC's list of the best Stephen King film and television adaptations, and also placed at 16 on Rolling Stone's top 30 King adaptations. There was intermittent buzz about a possible adaptation of Pet Sematary. Juan Carlos Fresnadillo was announced to direct an adaptation in October 2013, but nothing came of it. In August 2017, the brother-sister team behind the 2017 adaptation of Stephen King's It, Andy and Barbara Muschietti, told the Toronto Sun that they hoped to adapt Pet Sematary after the sequel of It. Again, there was no further action. Finally, in December 2017, Paramount Pictures announced that it was remaking the film, with Jeff Bueller penning the script and Kevin Kolsch and Dennis Widmeyer set to direct. The new adaptation stars Jason Clarke and Amy Seimetz as Lewis and Rachel Creed, with John Lithgow appearing as Judd Crandall. The movie began filming in Montreal, Canada in June 2018 and was released on April 5th 2019. The information brought to you in this video has been provided by Wikipedia. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to the Entertainment Log.